Model building. More than 1 million men and women tinker and build in their free time. Whether it's high-tech aircraft, gigantic diggers, or steam-powered trains, the model building dreams just keep getting bigger. Hans-Jürgen Wessels builds trucks at a scale of 1 to 2. Extreme precision. Rolf Stabrot can't afford to make a single mistake for his rocket launch. A miniature version of Stuttgart's old train station. Model builders want to save this masterpiece from ruin. Florian Keilwitz has poured 30,000 euros into his fighter jet. Thrills and excitement as it takes its maiden flight. Florian Keilwitz is living his dream of flying, even if only at a scale of 1 to 4. His latest project, the Eurofighter, handmade with love.
The sheer size of it was really exciting to me. And I had to squeeze it into the basement here, even though, as you can see, it's really too small a space. So I really had to do it because it's such a huge machine and it's really one of a kind. Its size and the way it flies and how big, heavy, and technically complex it is, that was a real challenge. So then you sit for 4 or 5 months in the basement, and if you look closely, then you can see how, for example, these little bits of text are all painted on. It's not a sticker or anything, it's all genuinely handmade.
Florian's friend Michael Viehweg also shares his passion for model plane building. The two friends tinker about for hours on end to reach a detailed solution. Today, they're testing out the steering technology. The Eurofighter is remote-controlled. The movements of the rudder pedals and chassis are controlled by a servo mechanism.
Is it secure?
Yeah, looks good. Everything's working smoothly. A lot of people obviously turn up their noses at this kind of thing since it requires so much investment and time as well as money. But it's our hobby, and
when it comes to this type of hobby, you know that in the worst-case scenario, you'll end up with a pile of rubbish, and you have to be aware of this from the very beginning.
Entrepreneur Florian Keilwitz has been building jets for 25 years. The Eurofighter alone has demanded 600 hours of work. At 370 centimeters long and with a wingspan of 265 centimeters, the model only just fits into the living room, which serves as a makeshift storage facility. His girlfriend tolerates his hobby.
It's an unspoken rule that nothing happens up here. I mean, the size of this plane would mean having to get rid of the sofa if we put it in here.
The Eurofighter's first takeoff is scheduled at a sports aerodrome near Uelzen, where his friends are already waiting. Sönke Steffen has brought along his model of an American fighter. The miniature F-15 is creating unexpected problems.
Yeah, it just turned out with Sönke's plane that the linkage with this linking rod here,
I had to take it out since I had to reinstall the spring down here, but luckily I had replacement part on me. I can't fit the linkage, so now we're fitting the whole of the suspension from here. And
there are always moments when you've tested everything as much as possible, and then you stand here and...
Yeah, why did the spring break? It was working before.
At home, everything works perfectly, and then you're here and everything is messed up all of a sudden.
An industrial engineer by trade, Sönke has spent a good year on his F-15.
You really get attached to the model, since you put so much time and work into it, as well as the costs, of course. So it's natural to be nervous, but as I said, I've had the model for a long time, and I actually know that from a flying point of view, there's nothing to worry about.
The jet is powered by a turbine, which alone costs around 3,000 euros.
It has a smoke machine so that even though it's an artificial plane, you can still see the flight path, which is a really cool effect.
And it smells good.
Yeah, and it smells good. Strawberry scented.
The control tower gives the go-ahead for takeoff. Now, things are getting serious. Big things come in small packages. Hans-Jürgen Wessels' Fendt Favorit model is always a favorite at tractor exhibitions.
The tractor weighs 1.5 tons and is obviously very powerful, so you have to test beforehand that the servo system is working. that nothing fails or suddenly breaks down. And of course, never let the tractor leave your sight, because if you do, then it will run away. Every model is a challenge for me, starting from nothing and ending up with something that works just like the original. Once everything is finished and runs and functions just like the original, then everything is okay for me.
The construction entrepreneur's model building career began when he was 23. His wife, Monica, knows how important the hobby is for her husband.
It's just pure relaxation. He's been working on it for nearly a year. And of course, we've been sharing him with the tractor for a year. Right, darling?
What's that?
You've been in your own world for the last 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's total rubbish, my hobby. Complete crap.
That's exactly what I meant to say.
The amateur builder has set up a workshop in his garage. Here, he can see the foundations of his greatest challenge yet. The frame and bodywork are as good as finished. Eventually, the model will weigh 1.9 tons without loading capacity, reach a speed of 20 kilometers an hour, and use all the same technology as the original.
This is a 6x4 Deutz tipper lorry. So the 2 axles at the back are powered, and one isn't powered, the front axle, of course. And it's at exactly 1:2 scale. It was built in 1950, equipped with a waist tipping feature and 256 horsepower, as it was originally constructed for the Delta project. I'm building it now at a 1:2 scale.
Old photos and the original plans with the most important measurements serve as a template. But above all, shrinking the original down to size requires a good eye and a lot of creativity. For this kind of model, there are no pre-made parts to buy.
To build the bodywork, you start working on the axles and make them to scale, 1:2 that is. I'm using Mercedes G axles, which will be shortened and aligned. Next, the frame will be made according to size so everything fits. The gearbox, hydraulics, everything still needs to be integrated.
The construction entrepreneur refuses any outside help. He only allows visitors into his workshop. He prefers not to work with other model builders on his projects. Hans-Jürgen Wesels likes to operate as a lone wolf and work out mistakes on his own. The bigger the model, the higher the possibility of setbacks.
The lorry manufacturers have got their big molds. The parts are produced and then they work. But for me, it's obviously a complete replica, where I have to produce every contour by hand. Then it's all about starting from scratch, like this roof, which I think I've made twice already. I've also made this part at the front here twice already. I wasn't happy with it, so I took it all apart again, cut it off, and tried again.
Hans-Jürgen estimates it will take around 1 year to complete this model, a test of patience.
Well, what's gone wrong now?
Nothing. Everything's working.
Is it? How far did you get then?
No further. It all just takes too long. It will take a while before I'm finished with it.
As a wife, you can't really comprehend it, but you can share the experience, which for me is the best thing, because there are such amazing things which come out of it. And then I'm really proud of him, simply as that.
The only part which the model builder has to outsource is the tipping trough, which he commissions a company to weld together. Eventually, he wants to use his truck on his own building sites, which means he can save money and, more importantly, have fun.
So my model should be able to transport sand just as well, just according to scale, as well as move and perform just like the original. It can load up to 1.3 cubic meters, and eventually it will weigh 5.6 tons in total, because it needs to travel on all types of terrain. So it should be able to perform exactly like the original.
Back at the sports aerodrome in Uelzen, all clear for Sönke Steffen's fighter jet to take off. The F-15's turbines bring the 23-kilo heavy model to top speeds of up to 300 kilometers an hour. To achieve this, the turbines make a total of 110,000 rotations. The pilot has to keep a close eye on his machine and correct its movements as it undertakes some daring maneuvers. The biggest risk would be to lose radio contact and therefore control.
The cloud base is really low today. It's risen a bit already, but it looks like 1,000 to 1,200 feet max, so just over 300 meters. Then we're really up there because it's a bigger model. If it's in the clouds, you can still hear it. But if you can't see it, then you can only hope that it gets out safely.
I'm going to land now.
Okay. Ready to land?
Yep.
After a 9-minute flying show, the fighter jet gets ready to land. The 5 liters of kerosene on board are nearly used up. For Sönke, the touchdown is always a critical moment. Success. The F-15, worth all of 10,000 euros, has landed safe and sound. Now it's time for the Eurofighter.
Got it. Okay, let's go.
So let's put it back into the stand, behind the turbine inlets. Exactly. Wow, it's really high. Great, then we can get rid of the tape now.
Florian Keilwitz has a detailed checklist which he goes through before takeoff. He must carefully check every step of the assembly process. One mistake, and the vehicle is lost.
Building a large plane is a challenge because both in terms of its weight, it has a takeoff mass of 66 kilograms, and in terms of its dimensions and weight, it's a completely different feeling to flying a smaller plane. A bigger plane feels bigger in the air. So the big incentive for me was to build a larger plane to see what's possible and what can be done. And that was my motivation.
The Eurofighter has 2 turbines and is fueled with 11 liters of kerosene. During the test run, one of the engines suddenly catches fire.
If there's too much fuel in the tank, we get this flame, and you have to wait patiently to see what's wrong. If I put the fire out now, it could have burnt the plane. So we let it run, and it blows out the back. It just switched off since it was too hot. But I think it'll work if we start it again, and then we can get going.
This is not the first time a model has gone up in flames, but the turbines run flawlessly after a restart. Florian wants to chance the flight. The aircraft surges up quickly, almost abruptly, but Florian Keilwitz can lower the plane using the elevator unit. He solves the problem by changing the trim via remote control. For a model builder, nothing is more important than safety. He has installed a backup for every system on board, which is powered by a separate energy source. For example, should the remote control's receiver fail, it would automatically be switched to the second receiver. It's always a special moment for Florian when one of his planes lands safely.
It's just a really good feeling. It was perfect. Flight was good, landing descent was great, the landing was good too, which is everything that makes up a flight. A complete and smooth flight with all the trimmings. That's the highlight of the whole day.
For steam train fanatics, Paradise is located in Rade vom Wald in the region of Berg. Model builders from all across Germany meet here several times a year to start up their locomotives on a private track. Michael Fuchs from Euskirchen is here with his steam engine weighing in at 120 kilos, which he built according to a historical model at a scale of 1 to 10.
This is a G81, a Prussian cargo train just like the original. There were around 5,000 of them, and they survived until 1972, when the last ones were scrapped. It's a model set which was built in 16 parts, plus the coal car, and it needs at least 2 years to assemble, or in my case, 3.
Some of the model builders have worked up to 8 years on their favorite models. All the more reason to celebrate as the locomotive drivers test out their creations on the unique track. At the fueling station, Hans Nitschke makes sure his engine is all clear and ready to go.
Yeah, this is actually a real regular-sized steam train that was just shrunk in the wash. It has the same functions as a normal steam train, with pressure on the tank, which is connected up to the cylinder. Yeah, just like Mama's pressure cooker.
The stoker sits behind the engine on the coal wagon, from where he can control the lever during the ride and replete the coal supply, making sure the boiler maintains a consistent level of steam. The track is 2 kilometers long and crisscrosses every which way along the private plot. Of course, visitors can go along for the ride. The get-together is the highlight of Michael Fuchs's year. Now his train is finally part of the family.
Here's the fan for the fire, which needs a bit of time to start up. We use a bit of charcoal to get it going, and then we start the hard coal, which takes around half an hour to reach a level of pressure that the train registers. And then it slowly starts to rise towards 8 bars. It's all to do with the 5 elements. Trains need fire, water, air, and then space as well, and earth, which here is the coal. So you always have the 5 elements present, so that when the train gets going, you really feel as if it's alive.
When the boiler has reached working temperature, the railway fanatic carefully releases steam into the cylinders and begins the journey. Everything runs smoothly. Michael Fuchs enjoys his time on the tracks, which for him makes his dream of becoming a train driver a reality, even if he has to inhale a lot of smoke.
With the smaller engine, you always have to look at it slightly from the side, because the steam generation can blast right into your face. With the big ones, they use what's called a wind deflecting plate, so the steam is diverted a bit. We don't have one of those here with the smaller model, so you get a big load of dirt in your face. But it's only soot. It's not so bad as fine dust, which you cough up and it takes 2 days to leave your lungs.
Now the locomotive fanatics can really let off some steam. Back south to Herrenberg, near the city of Stuttgart, where the local model building club is attempting an unusual challenge. Under the leadership of Rainer Braun, in just over 6 months' time, these men and women want to assemble and restore a huge model city. The model was originally in a basement room in Stuttgart's train station and was on its last legs by the time of its builder's death.
So the model had not been cleaned for 4 years, and there were visible damages due to moisture levels present in its previous environment. And it's really a big challenge to put the model back together and restore it after it's been sawed into pieces.
Rainer Braun took the model over from its builder's family. Originally, it had an area of 180 square meters.
We have a total of 60 components here in Stuttgart which were disassembled. Here we can see one component. You can see where it was cut. Obviously, it's all going to be put back together, which is the challenge that we face. Parallel to that is the dusting off and cleaning for the restoration of the model, which is what Benny and Joseph are doing here and which is really important.
The model buildings correspond exactly to the original. Unfortunately, many of the buildings were constructed using lightweight materials.
It's damaged there. It wasn't stuck on properly. Oh, God.
Something's always going wrong there.
And now you can see that there are completely different materials which are attached. It's coming apart in the middle. Let's leave it, put it back, and set it up properly, because it won't work like that. Otherwise, it might work in the middle. Careful.
When you're dealing with a building like this, something always goes wrong, so you always have to repair it afterwards.
At the heart of the model is Stuttgart's central train station, but the landmark's lights have gone out.
The question is whether any power is getting to it at all. None. None here as well, right? It seems to be faulty. Be careful, what kind of cable is this here? Looks like exactly that.
So, the problem is that these cables here have slipped out of the insulation, so we can't get any power up there.
Gerald Virak is a master model builder and the team's problem solver.
Some of the solder points are 30 years old, which means depending on how well they were soldered, they aren't usable anymore. So we have to resolder them onto the tracks. But we first need an idea of which tracks we will use. We definitely won't use all 16 of the tracks from the train station. Just wouldn't work. And then moving on from the tracks, sort out which points are switchable for a plan of operation which will work for the whole model, so the visitors can see as much of the site in operation as possible.
The biggest challenge, they don't have any of the old blueprints or records. The first thing Gerald and his team have to do is figure out how the model works.
Part of it still isn't working, but we'll sort it out soon. Let there be light. Let there be light. Testing. Hooray! There was light.
The model was out of use for 4 years. Now, all of the engines and carriages must be cleaned and made ready to drive again. An even bigger problem are the track switches and signals. Stefan Grimmeisen has to rewire and reconnect hundreds of them, a task which will take months.
Most of the signals cables have been cut off, as you can see, meaning they are blank cables, which have unfortunately not been labeled. It's LED technology, which means it must be attached properly for anything to actually happen. Now we need to see how the signals are functioning and which signal we need to put where to get the system up and running and the signal working again.
One by one, components are put together and the trackage is repaired.
Now we have a problem. We have built the framework differently, so when we connect it, wood is hitting wood and not rail on rail. So there's a gap here, where no carriage or train can get past. In other places, like here, we may have to attach a completely new piece of rail. We always have to decide the appropriate course of action on an individual basis.
Beneath the model, everything must be completely rewired, a task which everyone wants to avoid.
Do you have it on track 6, Hans?
Yes, you can come in on the left rail.
Great, it's going through. We got the right cable. Now you can start soldering.
Gerald and Rainer call the team together. Even small victories must be celebrated to keep up the workers' morale.
So this morning we attached the first rail, and now we'll get our first train moving.
In just over half a year, as many trains as possible should be on the go on a scale of 1 to 160. The team hopes their model will become the talk of the town. Reuchora Sports Aerodrome near Leipzig. Every year, Europe's biggest rocket fanatics come together to try out their latest models. Takeoffs are duly registered with the air safety authorities and the local control tower. Safety first. Thomas Müller is about to undertake his certification flight. Every model builder requires a state license in order to use certain rocket motors.
It's a heavy beast. 25 kilos. Oh, yeah.
The certification is basically a safety training. Matthias Gärtner will perform a technical inspection of the rocket and observe its flight.
It's hard not to be nervous, since it's the biggest rocket which you can fly in Germany.
First, the examiner performs a visual inspection.
Yeah, that all looks really well made. Excellent. I checked, for example, if there were any dents, if there was any damage in any way, or if anything didn't look straight. Those are the main points, because then it could be the case that the rocket doesn't take off properly. I also checked whether the two so-called rail buttons, which drive the rocket for the first few meters, are aligned. Because if they're not, then firstly, the rocket might start at an angle, and secondly, they can get twisted on the ramp, in which case the rocket is stuck on the ramp. The thrust here is about 130 kilograms, and together with the ramp, they would both become airborne.
Next, the engineer checks the weight distribution, which is important for flight stability.
Now that it's lying in the ramp, I can check the rocket's balance. It's not an exact test, of course, but you can basically tell. Yeah, here's the center of balance. That fits because of the pressure point. Where was it? Here. That's 2 gauges, so it's stable enough. So from my side, it's a definite go-ahead for the flight.
Matthias Gärtner is a passionate rocket builder himself and knows a lot is at stake for his examinee. But Thomas tries to remain calm and collected.
Yeah, everything is still quite relaxed. The nerves will come before blastoff.
It's always the last 30 seconds before blastoff where I say, no, I don't want to live anymore. Let me go now.
Thomas Müller built his first rocket at the age of 12, and since then, his fascination for model rocket building has steadily grown. In his workshop at home, the physicist is constantly tinkering with newer and bigger models. Today's flight is the high point of his model building career.
Here there are magnetic switches on the rocket, which switch on the electricity. So when we're moving it, we want the rocket's activation to be exact, so that when it's reached its vertex, the 9 grams of gunpowder inside blow the top off. And if the gunpowder is active on the ground, it could be quite dangerous. That's why you need a switch to activate the rocket exactly as needed while it's still on the launch pad.
The rocket fanatics gather at the starting position for the launch. The rocket's propellant charge is released remotely, but at first nothing happens. Finally, it's off. The rocket shoots up at 460 kilometers an hour into the sky. After 16 seconds, it reaches its maximum altitude of 1,000 meters, at which point the parachutes are released. But today, the model is led off course by strong winds. The rocket does land safely, but instead of landing at its planned spot, it ends up in a nearby reservoir. The rescue team must put on swimming trunks and salvage what they can. Examiner Matthias Gärtner does his best to stay positive about the crash landing.
It's wet, meaning it's not necessarily flight ready, but it's still within regulation. We also didn't land outside of the range, which would have been a reason to fail him, but there were no disasters in that sense. So I can still congratulate him. Things didn't go exactly according to plan, and he still needs to see how much is still functioning. It could end up costing him 1,200, 1,300 euros.
Thomas!
The test has been passed, but the model is destroyed. Poor Thomas Müller is forced to spend the rest of his day dismantling his creation. He won't be able to recycle much of it apart from the chassis, but he takes this disaster on the chin.
The electronics are probably gone, since it was completely submerged in water. So the electronics are probably broken. I mean, water landings are not that common. And I've never landed in water before. I've also never had a crash like that. So it's my first failure, but a successful failure. Like Apollo 13.
Successful failures. Hans-Jürgen Wessels has had his fair share of those. The construction entrepreneur has now been working on his truck model for over 8 months, during which he has sacrificed every minute of free time he's had. But his optimistic time frame won't cut it anymore. The construction will last 2 years instead of 1. For Wessels, every detail must match the original.
The trough's also ready to be built now. It took around 6 weeks because I had to perfect the trough's pivot for tipping, as well as the hydraulic system and the hydraulic stroke length, so that I could tip it at a 70-degree angle. That way the sand, stones, whatever it's transporting will all be completely emptied during tipping. Here's the oil tank, 40 liters of hydraulic oil for the whole system, which will be used for tipping and driving.
The truck model will eventually be powered by a 40-horsepower industrial benzene motor. There will be a hydraulic transmission system powering the gearbox, the tipping trough, and the steering.
This is an old Mercedes G-Class gearbox, a 4-speed transmission. Now I need to test it out. I'm not planning on using a diesel engine here in the front. I'd rather have it all powered hydraulically. This is the oil engine, which somehow I will have to fit in front of the gearbox and make sure that all the forces, the torque, etc., are applied to the engine in the correct ratios. Because if it's built wrongly, the transmission bearings will be destroyed.
Hans-Jürgen estimates that he will eventually have worked around 1,000 hours on the truck's construction. What's more, the materials will cost a total of 25,000 euros. Model building on a scale of 1 to 2 is an expensive hobby.
As far as the rod, I can't buy anything since they're all unique pieces. So I have to construct the steel parts myself. At most, I can use the screws, but nothing else. I have to make it all myself. I've now cut the thread for my oil engine, which will be planted in the transmission. In my life, I've never gone for the easy option. I originally started with Lego bricks, and I've always needed to be challenged, to do something demanding, which is why I need this craft, this model building hobby. It's a challenge which is both necessary and incredibly exciting for me.
For Hans-Jürgen, working on his model is a way to relax. Unfortunately, the construction entrepreneur eventually has to sell most of his models, which is the only way he can finance his expensive projects.
Once the front of the lorry is finished, painted, and fully fitted, before then I can't test anything. Then I'll attach the battery, fill up the tank, start her up and get her going. That's my goal, really, to get the lorry properly working and ready to drive. At that point, nothing else can be done. It all has to be ready, spick and span, and ready for use. I've done it 30 times before, and I'll do it here as well.
Bombs away in Royschora. Rockets were first deployed at the Battle of the Nations at Leipzig in 1813, an event which the Historic Rocket Society is commemorating. Meanwhile, the rocket builders prepare their modern rockets. Rolf Stabroth and Olivier Timper top up the ejection charge. Half a gram of gunpowder is enough to launch the parachutes when the flight hits its apex.
The thing you're most scared of at this point is if you never get your model back. This is the moment you've been building towards. But from the moment your rocket is on the launch pad, you have no control over what happens. You just push the button, and from that moment, everything must go according to plan. So that's where the fear or the stress comes into this hobby. You've put 2 years of work into this model. And at the exact moment, the weather, the electrics, and the pyrotechnics all have to work together perfectly.
This model of rocket is known as the Rebel Buccaneer. The kit's assembly can take over 50 hours. The model is a good 2 meters high and weighs around 4 kilograms. After ignition, the rocket can be propelled up to speeds of over 500 kilometers an hour. They plan on reaching an altitude of 1,450 meters, at which point the brake parachutes should release. Olivier's main obstacle, the nearby reservoir.
So we're nearly ready for launch on ramp X1, which is Olivier's Rebel Buccaneer, which is 2 meters long, about 10 centimeters in diameter, 3.9 kilograms in weight, and should reach a height of 1,000 meters on a J350 motor. 3, 2, 1, blast off.
Now, Olivier can only hope the technology works as planned.
So far, so good. Everything's going according to plan. We just got to make it back down, and the power unit has to kick in, and then I'll be happy.
But Olivier must watch powerlessly as misfortune takes its course. His rocket is also blown off course and sinks in the reservoir.
It was the perfect flight, but slightly blown off course. And although it was all flight as designed, the lake was just too big.
Change of scene. Olivier Timper visits Rolf Stabroth frequently in his garage workshop. This is where they spent a good 500 hours working on the model of a Russian Proton rocket.
So I've thought about a new parachute release system for the next flight, in which each individual part of the Proton lands separately.
Comes a part of the chute, right?
And they're not all connected, so that the top has a parachute, the electronic B part has a parachute. Afterwards, we'll...
So we can see where you've hidden everything.
Yeah, we don't have to simulate it now. So when the expelling charge is released, this part comes off and pulls on this tape here. Then electronic B will land with this parachute. And this parachute must then...
Pull the big part out, right?
Yes, pull out the big one, kind of as a pilot chute. Launching such a big model is always exciting, because you've worked on it for 1.5 years. And it's like a little baby, which you've raised, and now the baby has to learn to walk. So it's obviously always an incredible and emotional moment, as long as everything comes together.
The former professional musician has been fascinated by rocket engines since he watched the moon landing in 1969.
Once you've caught the rocket bug, you can't get rid of it. The scramble to get to the moon was the thing which excited us so much as teenagers. Every other kid wanted to become a cosmonaut or an astronaut. When the moon landing happened in the late 60s, we were all following it, glued to our radio and television sets.
In his living room, a homemade space shuttle. The whole of the Stabroth family share his dream of flying into space.
I could never do this kind of hobby if it weren't for my wife. Because it's so intense, you really need a partner to help you and collaborate. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work.
Rade vom Wald in the region of Berg. Site of the famous Husaland, a model train facility named after its builder, Michael Husa. Even as a young boy, Husa dreamed of having his own train. But instead of a job with Deutsche Bahn, he decided to make his own miniature railway world.
I always had a little Märklin train running, but I didn't want a toy. I wanted to be on the train and be the train driver. I wanted to sit on, or better still, in the train, which is where I got the idea to set up a couple of tracks here in the hills where there's so much space. But I was poor and had no means of getting hold of a train and driving it. So then I thought, why not first build the tracks and then set up these train driving days? Then people come to visit you and let you drive their trains. And that's exactly what happened.
Today, his gatherings are among the annual highlights of the model train community. It's the steam train enthusiasts, especially for whom the conditions at Husaland are ideal. Today, however, Husa is underway with an electric train, which he's trying to position correctly.
The turntable, which directs the trains, has currently got an electric train on it, which I can drive in whatever direction. But the steam trains shouldn't drive backwards as quickly as forwards, which is why they always have to be turned around at the end of the track.
Michael Husa has been working on his 5-inch gauge model tracks for 20 years. The model is his life's work. Train driver Hans Nitschke is one of the regular guests here. He cheerfully chauffeurs visitors full steam ahead through the garden. For him, the hobby is a welcome break from his day job.
This is all just for fun. It's my hobby, and I enjoy it when people have a good time here. There's obviously some work involved here, but then again, which hobby doesn't require any work?
As the visitors' train gets going again, Thomas Buck connects his shunting engine to the ballast wagons. The train, a BR-81 model, was built in the 1920s, and today it's running in mini format at a scale of 1 to 10.
We're pulling back now, so we can get to the ballast via this track, so we need to go back and forth a bit. Since the train came in so straight, we went forward and now have to take the train back. So if I had driven the train like this, then now we'd be at the ballast with the carriage behind. We're pulling the whole train back past the switch, where we can bend around and drive up to the ballast, load up, and transport it away.
First, Thomas Buck maneuvers his ballast train towards the loading site. An auto mechanic by trade, he wants to raise a new track bed, but he'll need supplies.
We can take up to 2.5 tons on a flat track. It's a really powerful train. It's got 45mm pistons, and with 8 bars of pressure, it can really go for it.
The train moves along the tracks at a snail's pace. Carrying the gravel load is hard work for the steam engine. Destination, the so-called Ponyhof train station, where his fellow rail fanatics have built a tipper for the car, so the ballast can be unloaded in proper style.
Some people drive around in a circle all day. I just can't do that. I prefer to play around a lot, maneuver, drive the cars back and forth from here to there. You always need to have a plan as well. I can't just drive around aimlessly. I need to have a task.
The railway companions will drive round after round late into the night. Big toys for big boys. Back with the train team in Herrenberg.
Hello, good morning.
Morning, Rainer.
Hi.
How's everything going a week before opening?
Oh, clock is ticking, but everything looks good.
So far, Rainer Braun and his team have constructed and joined up 40 models out of a total of 60. That should be enough for the start. Later, the model can be extended. It's not the size of the model, but its attention to detail which is meant to captivate visitors.
My great-grandfather must be somewhere in here.
If you don't know exactly which gravestone is his, I'll get a magnifying glass and then you can find him.
Then I'd have to be able to read, so fat chance.
Most of the surface is taken up by the old Stuttgart train station and its rail system.
So, Gerald, how's it going in terms of the trains?
In terms of the trains, it's looking really good. We've equipped the model with over 500 vehicles, just for the visuals, since the model was actually never up and running. But we've set it up so that there are 7 sites in operation, and there will be 1 train going back and forth over the entire model, powered by this automatic shuttle system. Then, for example, we could have the Intercity Express go back and forth, which will look great over a 10-meter stretch of track.
The surprisingly difficult thing was coordinating all the people so that no one gets in the way. There's not much space here between the model and the workshop itself, so that was the difficulty in the last few weeks. But we got it all done and can still all look one another in the eye.
The model builders are focusing on the design of the buildings and street scenes. They've painted and arranged thousands of figures by hand. Future visitors should be able to have a real sense of the lively city atmosphere. The buildings are lit in as many different ways as possible. For this job, Stefan Grimmeisen must disassemble the buildings and rewire them floor by floor.
These buildings are amazingly designed with desks, telephones, everything. The only problem was that there had been light bulbs inside, which get very hot, and it's all made of cardboard and plastic. So our fear was that the light bulbs would make everything melt and fuse together and stop working, and in the worst case scenario, potentially also catch fire. That's why we're now fitting all the buildings with LED technology.
Head conservator Gerald is still struggling with the miniature trains, which keep getting derailed due to the model's constant gathering of dirt.
Now the silver one. Turn it to the right. Yeah, that's working. So the final version will have 20 trains running, or at least attached, meaning there will always be a few meters where a train is running, in the freight area as well, over a space of 2 to 3 meters or so. That will keep going, and if one of the trains in the exhibition stops working, then we'll just switch off the system and repair it again in the evening.
Meanwhile, after 3,000 hours of work, the model has finally opened.
We've grown from the center outwards, which was difficult because we couldn't always foresee how far along we were or how long we needed for each building. It was hard to plan. So we're really all proud of what we've achieved here. We've accomplished what no one believed we could.
Instead of rotting away in a basement, the model will gain new luster. Back to the rocket experts. Rolf Stabroth can hardly wait to get his Proton rocket into the sky. His team is helping him tick off the checklist and assemble the engine. The model has a total of 7 rocket engines, which give it the needed thrust.
These are the electric detonators which start the engine. If we give it some power here, then this little ignition pill burns at an incredible heat. I'm not sure what's in it, some kind of magnesium mixture. And this enormous heat ignites the motor.
Finally, the new parachute system is assembled. The rocket should split into 3 pieces at the apex of the flight, which will fall to the ground with their respective parachutes. The wind hasn't let up. The risk that this rocket will also land in the reservoir is high. But Rolf Stabroth doesn't want to suffer the same fate as his colleagues.
I'm not totally happy with the vertical. The wind is coming from over there, and right there is the reservoir. So what can you do? I'll have to aim it slightly in that direction so that when the parachute is released, the rocket doesn't get blown so far off that it lands in the water.
The countdown is played from a tape, fittingly in Russian.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The Proton rocket reaches a height of 400 meters. Enthralled, Rolf Stabroth follows the flight and watches as the ejection is triggered and the individual pieces of the rocket make their way back down to Earth by means of the parachutes.
We would like to ask the recovery team to keep an eye on the individual pieces to see if we can rescue them properly.
It didn't land in the water, thank God. Not a water landing. That's something of a positive. Now it's going back on the shelf until next year.
At the end of the day, Olivier can laugh again despite his unexpected water landing. The rocket builder community gathers for a group photo. Everyone who managed to get their rockets to launch today is a world-class model builder.